How's it going, everyone? Session here. Welcome to a Final Fantasy XIV video. So recently, during my stream, somebody brought up a video that was basically making comparison of Final Fantasy XIV as an MMO versus other MMOs, but specifically World of Warcraft. Now, to give myself like a small little introduction, I've been playing 14 for over 10 years at this point. I'm Unk status. I've been here since like as close to day one as possible, basically. And like I've just see it's funny because I play Final Fantasy 14 because it's a Final Fantasy and not because it's an MMO. So I have dabbled in other MMOs prior to 14, like World of Warcraft, Lost Ark, RuneScape, the works. But I didn't really pick up the idea of an MMO. So there's a streamer out there. They're pretty known, I guess. Their name is Preach. They are doing 14 rating. And so from what I'm understanding is they're like a WoW veteran who's currently going through the Savage Raids in 14 and pretty much explaining what's so different between the two games, which I think is very interesting because for somebody of my own like personal approach towards like rating in 14 as well, I've evolved immensely from when I first started playing the game a decade ago to now where I am at the in terms of my career of like playing this game. So we also have had moments on our own stream where we've talked about the differentiation between all the MMOs, kind of what they bring to the game for their pros and their cons, and kind of what's different, what feels similar. And I understand that 14 is a much very different MMO than the other MMOs that are out there. But there's still moments in time where we think about what cool things can we bring to the table for the MMO itself. And so I'm hoping that we can get an idea of the differentiation between World of Warcraft versus 14. Now, as well to, my time spent playing 14, it's a lot of hours. I don't have anywhere near as many hours playing World of Warcraft. I never even really got into raiding in WoW, so I'm pretty curious to see like how it plays out. I have also dabbled in like watching some gameplay. I really like watching other MMOs, but I haven't had a chance to like actually sit down and play them. I did end up playing like World of Warcraft after the WoW Classic thing became a thing, and what's shocking was that my character was still there from like a decade plus ago, so that was really cool. But yeah, I'm really curious to see kind of what this video is and kind of finding out more details to follow. So let's watch it and see.
Come on.
Easy as fuck.
Yes!
It was the pool where I fucking ate glue.
Yes, it was! Mike called
Yeah, they
it!
cleared him 12. Let's
5
go.
years and your boy is back. We're raiding again. In fact, as of recording this, we've full cleared. We've done it. I'm an official Savage Raider. And the big question that came in after doing this, why now? Why FF? Why not Mythic? And I think it's a good opportunity to use the wealth of knowledge I've had raiding for nearly 20 years in World of Warcraft to compare the two finally, because there's a lot of misgivings and a lot of changes on this that we're going to get into. So in order to make it easy for you guys, I have divided it into several sections. So section 1, why now and why FF? Well, let's start with the why now. You might remember quite a few years ago, I did this.
Hey, there he is.
Hey.
Well, now that looks like this.
Oh. Congratulations.
Needless to say, my boys are less interested in daddy coming home and getting to play with me and more in terms of have I got any early access game codes that they can get into. My son is already playing Resident Evil 9 and I haven't touched it yet.
Let's go.
So that gave me a bit more free time in the evenings. So I wanted to know, can I raid again? Let's test it out. I got asked if I would join the raid team with my friend Alex that I do the casting with for Raid First, which I'll be doing soon for the Midnight Raid.
Can I get that again real quick, actually? Not Friday, not Saturday. That's not Saturday. Oh, okay, it's cool.
So why FF? Well, FF still requires less than what WoW does outside of raid time. The plan is to do 2 raids a week just for 3 hours, not blind, very casual, bunch of old schoolers, and just get things done. And that way I don't have to overcommit.
So I actually wanted to talk about that real quick because we did talk about this the other day, and because I think right now there's an active race going on in World of Warcraft because like a new raid came out. Now, what I've understood is there is a very big difference between the time commitment spent in playing 14 than there is in playing World of Warcraft. So there's a differentiation, right? So in WoW, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I have no idea. All of the gear and all of the raid content comes out at the same time. And I think also there's 2 teams usually. It's like 20 people to raid, and you basically have to get gear or as much gear as possible necessary to do the content in WoW raiding for that content. So like the time that it takes to actually clear the raid kind of ranges between 2 to 3 weeks. which is a lot longer than 14's usual Savage rating, where it takes a literal day, and even the Ultimate rating too, which also tends to take about like a week or so. Now, I feel like for myself personally, as somebody who started off as a very like casual player, who's eventually evolved and gotten older and more, more seasoned, and now I'm also able to do Savage rating and Ultimates as well. I've always wanted to know, like, because I'm not like a world first raider, I'm not like a super hardcore raider. I consider myself like a mid-core ish player who can like kind of maintain some form of consistency, which is nice. But I've always wanted to, personally, I've always felt like the raiding experience in 14 goes by super quickly. I'm not, it takes me weeks to clear content in general, but I feel like what I've always wanted was that even at the hardcore level and the world first level, that it would also take like a long time to clear the content. Like, I liked the idea of Savage raids and Ultimate raids taking longer than a day and a week, right? But from how the way that you prepare for the content, like figuratively, it takes almost 19 weeks, up to at least, right? At most 19 weeks to be prepared for like the ultimate, right? So it takes more, it's actually like more like 20 something weeks to actually like go through the whole cycle of content. But in reality, it's only like a single week, because you just wait till the patch comes out, then the ultimate drops, and you just go into the content and you like prog it. But like Savage rating absolutely takes just 24 hours, right? So like the patch drops, you buy your crafted gear, you get it pentamelded, and then you just like wait till the patch drops, and then boom, you just go into the content, right? So I feel like people have been wanting for the raids to last like a little bit longer than normal, and I'm also in agreement to that to a degree, but I can also understand that like that kind of commitment can be quite a bit, because obviously, lots of world first raiders that are also working have to take like the week off, and sometimes taking up 2 weeks can be like a little bit much. But I feel like I mean, again, I'm not a world first racer, so I can't really give him my real like 2 cents into this, but I feel like the whole like no lifing it for a week thing is not like my favorite cup of tea. But I wouldn't really be able to like give like my own opinion about that until I actually try to world first race, But I've always wanted the race to be longer than what it normally is for both Savage rating and Ultimates. Just kind of like food for thought. So anyways,
nothing worse than overcommitting to a raid guild. I could do the 3 raids a week for 4 hours or whatever, and I simply can't do that. Although my kids want less of my attention, that doesn't mean they want zero, and I have homework and things to do. So that was the situation. In terms of dailies, weeklies, that kind of thing, in FF, in about an hour, if you're efficient, you can have all your weekly stuff done. You just collect some stones, and you can buy some bits of gear with that as the raid goes on. Hour, couple of hours, nothing more to it. Easy game. In WoW, if we're going to commit to mythic raiding, we're still going to want to spend several weeks filling vaults, maintaining an alt perhaps. All that kind of stuff is what's required for the level of raiding I want over there, so it made sense to try this out with FF. Alternative reason? I've never done it before, although I have some raiding experience in Final Fantasy, and I've even done some of the old Savages, because you can go and do that.
Funny. Actually, I mean, not for nothing, but I feel like I've seen his name before, but I don't... I mean, I highly doubt it though, because I'm assuming he plays in... I see Moogle, so I think he's... I mean, there's somebody doing like a call-out thing, and it says Moogle, which I think is EU, right? So... probably not.
I haven't committed to the latest tier, getting gear, going through all the process of being up to date with what I need to do in order to Savage Raid, so I wanted that experience for one. And on top of that, it's wrestling themed. And for those of you who don't know, before I became a YouTube streamer man content creator, I trained to be a pro wrestler. Here's some embarrassing footage from 1996.
That's cool. Bro's channeling his like inner WWE. Heck yeah. On the bed too.
That's me. Face paint and all. Face paint and all. I did professionally train after that until I realized that I might end up in a wheelchair and didn't want to pursue that. Section 2. I am really bad. I'll be honest. I know that
like
FF
14?
footage for a WoW player looks very confusing. It's very flashy and overwhelming. Don't worry if it's anything really complicated. I'm going to show it to you in a way that you'll understand. But for the FF players out there currently watching this, you are seeing like just how bad I am. Those guys will recognize it immediately. I am choosing some clips that highlight some horrendous choices, to the point that I apologized to my raid leader after we had finished clearing the Savage Raid, saying, I cannot believe you stuck with me. And he was like, it's fine. We expected it. But
well, so I'm actually kind of curious, because I'm wondering, I mean, I understand that he's like a dad. He's he's like casually going through the content, like nothing too crazy. I wonder what the translation is for people doing content at a high end level in World of Warcraft and coming to 14. Because I've actually heard a lot of players who were like World of Warcraft veterans say that playing 14 is like way more challenging in comparison. But I think that also depends on how the rating works over there as well. What I understood was that the whole dancing schema in 14, like it doesn't exist anywhere near as strictly in World of Warcraft. You kind of play DPS and you're pressing like all the funny buttons and like rotation output and like it's cool. And apparently the pressure is a lot more on tanks and healers. Whereas like for 14, it's kind of pressure on everybody, but there is like a little bit of a further pressure on certain roles depending on like what it is. Normally it kind of relies on either like tanks or healers, but DPS also have their moments when the DPS check becomes like a real problem. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that I mean, I feel like sometimes you kind of like have the WoW like the raid mentality kind of lets you want to try to play like if you play like hardcore raiding in one of the game, like you would probably try and play hardcore raiding in another one. But he said he's trying to do it casually.
Yeah, it
So,
was bad.
yeah, it
Talk
was like
about
a
a
thought.
rude awakening. A rude awakening. Here's the thing.
Okay.
So first of all, the jump from doing extremes, which are one-off encounters that are harder than the sort of like Pug story normal mode, can have some bit complexity to them, but generally you're going to clear them within a few pulls. You know, it might take you a couple of hours, something like that, to learn some of the trickier mechanics, but it's ultra forgiving. Similar to World of Warcraft, you can go into heroic or be in a heroic guild, and then if you jump to mythic, that step up is a gulf. It is like crossing the Grand Canyon. It is a massive, massive leap in complexity in most cases that a lot of people who have been comfortable in normal, comfortable in heroic, go into mythic because they want a little bit more and are like, oh my god. Like the amount of trials I've lost over the years because they've been very solid heroic raiders, joining mythic is incountable. Like,
I never really thought about that actually. The thought of people joining guilds in WoW for certain levels of play, like usually when it comes to free companies or like I guess there are also guilds in 14, like I don't know, do people join guilds that are based on a certain like level of play? Because I've never done that before. Like I just joined because I want to like socialize and meet people. But I feel like I separate my raiding experience from like the social aspect. But it also is like a benefit if they also raid. But I didn't think that people actually had guilds or FCs that were based on like the raiding experience.
It's
I think that's
innumerable
interesting.
amounts of people. And the same is here. There were things going on in Savage that I just didn't know what to do. More on that later.
Okay.
More on that later.
Okay.
But needless to say, I was bad. Really, really bad. I'm better now. And you will see over the course of the footage, like the UI starts to change. Other things start to change because I had to start figuring out how to deal with this much more difficult encounter. But one thing I've always pressed onto you guys is if you do the more difficult content in a game, you will just get so much better because you're having to adapt and figure out how to deal with these things and take advice and learn things that other people are passing down from you or to you. And you just get better at it. So you will see an improvement for sure. It's embarrassing for me to look at our early kills and see how I played compared to what I was doing in the later bosses. So how many bosses are we doing? We're doing 5 bosses. It's technically 4 in the way this works, but we're going to be doing something called a door boss. So you'll have boss 1, which is Vamp, which is the sort of sexy femme fatale wrestling character. Then we're going to be doing the extremes, which are 2 brothers, kind of surfer bros with a lot of Sum 41 soundtrack going on through it, who are surfing and dropping fire everywhere. Then we're going to be doing Tyrants, the 3rd of the 4 bosses. Tyrant is going to be summoning these mega weapons that slice you up and do all sorts of crazy stuff. Then we're going to be doing the Lindworm, which is the final boss. However, that has 2 phases that literally are 2 separate bosses. You'll kill the first boss, and then a cutscene will play, and then you get a new boss at the back of it. So there's technically 5 bosses. And the trick with the Lindworm, the final boss, is you have to kill both bosses in the time limit. So in Final Fantasy, when you join a raid environment, you are given a time limit before that instance will close, and then you go back in and you have to re-kill the first boss.
Is that not
in order to access the next one? However, if you do access the next one when you die or wipe or whatever, you will restart at the second boss. You won't have to do the first phase again. So it's technically 5 bosses of the 4 that are listed. That's what we're going to be doing.
Cool.
Okay. Biggest problems I found. Why am I so bad? First of all, foundational awareness. Let's talk about that. This is a vital tool to any raider, and it simply comes with experience. I will give you one of the easiest examples because it is nonsense that I struggled with this. I've got better at it now, but it's just something that you don't do in normals and extremes and things like that, and that is simply the way markers. So Final Fantasy XIV arenas are part of the encounter. There's no boss mods, more on that later. There are no boss mods, and so a lot of the things that are happening are done either visually, the boss will be physically doing something, so it'll be a right arm will appear, or it will move first, something like that. That is your boss warning of what is about to happen. It's where he's facing, things like that.
Does WoW not
you're going to be
do
watching that, but also the arena itself will be decorated in a way, so cracks on the floor, things like that, are actually markers that they're providing for you for how this mechanic is going to play out. And so you want to be taking into account like intricate designs on the floor, things like that are going to be very important, as are the arena around you, like the background and visuals are actually going to come into play in various occasions. So you want to know about that as well. But a big part of FF14 raiding is putting down the way markers. These are in WoW, but typically in World of Warcraft, you can use them and you can change them in combat to like notify we're going to be going to green, things like that, right? We have ping as well, but like you'll put down we're going to go to green, we're going to go to red, we're going to go to blue, that kind of thing. And that is a dynamic thing that can move throughout the fight. Not in Final Fantasy XIV. When they're down, and they are put in such a specific position because certain very difficult mechanics are going to be resolved involving those markers. So this is a big part of Final Fantasy XIV raiding. In fact, it got us stuck at one point on the third boss because we ended up, through people researching and figuring stuff out, with 3 different sets of way markers, and that led to immeasurable problems, to the point where after the end of the raid, it was like, right, we're going to go away and figure out which way markers we're going to use, because you have to position almost pixel perfect, very relative to these markers. And my issue was, although, and this sounds so stupid, I know, but you'll understand where I'm coming from. Although the markers go A1, B2, C3, right? D4, very obvious. In Savage, things can happen so quickly that if someone says we need to go to D because things are going to change where we have to go on a pull-by-pull basis, and you don't immediately click with like muscle memory that if I can see 1, then I know that D is over here, so I instantly move. I did not have that foundational experience. I am very used to in the slower encounters that we have in normals and extremes and even old Savages of being able to like turn the camera and have a look where it is. And that is too slow. That is way, way too slow.
Yeah, I feel like one of the most intriguing things, especially over the course of time of the game's development, is that the markers are static. There was a point in time back in the day where you also could move the markers as the raid kind of like persists, which, thinking about it now though, I feel like that wasn't always the case scenario, but I don't immediately think of, I don't know like which raids immediately come into mind where the markers changing mid-battle was like an actual situation, but I feel like already it's been so long ago since we were able to do that, so it's kind of like a blur to me at this point. But yeah, I mean, I understand that World of Warcraft actually maintains it so that you can move the markers mid-combat. I think that's fascinating. I do also think though that like one thing that I feel people have talked about a lot with the marker placements in 14 rating is that the usual like foundation of the markers kind of tend to stay the same, right? Like your A is north, your 1 is going to be clockwise from that point forward, or counter, depending on what it is, and then you just have like a pretty much like a big circle, right? Like this, the symmetry of marker placement kind of is forced upon the way how the mechanics are designed across the entire fight. And I think that feedback people have always wanted to give is that the marker placement actually is a little unorthodox in terms of its like symmetrical design. So like, that way where the markers are placed actually does change immensely between all the fights. And we don't often get fights where those marker placements are like entirely, not like random, but they're put in like a formation that's not too like constant, I guess you could say. So I think the easiest example that I think about is in P7, which was against Agdesis and Endwalker, where it's the tree boss. You have the 3 markers in the top left and top right, and then you have like the other 2 markers that were kind of there for another purpose that it was. But the thing is, like, you wouldn't have been able to put those markers there until you actually like cleared the fight, right? So the markers that were placed during the progression of the fight were like much different. But I feel like what I've always wondered is if fight design to actually like allow the markers to be used and placed and change in ways that we usually don't expect them to be. And I feel like with another example too is like in cruiserweight versus like M7, very similar example too, where the markers were not actually like super necessary, but you could use them. But you had the markers on the first platform to kind of indicate certain situations and where to stand and where to go, or to kind of like indicate what's north. And the same thing applied with the third platform too, like similar situation. um so I wonder if they'll ever design mechanics where Savage Raids don't have that symmetry anymore when it comes to it. We get them like sometimes, right? But like, I mean, it's like food for thought. I didn't realize that like the markers changed in WoW like mid combat still. So yeah.
And I realized this almost immediately, specifically on the extremes, which was the harder fight. I will say a big plus for Final Fantasy XIV rating, at least in this tier, is that the progression and difficulty was very linear. It went from easiest to hardest all the way up. With a nice smooth curve, right? Not always the case, I'm sure, but like that's how it went for me in this raid tier. And I didn't have that knowledge. That became a major problem in the harder fights later on, where you have to go very, very quickly to a certain location, and actually made me better. So more on that later. But I didn't have that knowledge. It became very apparent that I could not do that, and I needed to learn how to do that very, very quickly. The second one, I think, is going to drive some people insane. WoW and FF14 players alike. I'm going to show you a clip right now. FF14 players are going to go, oh, I know what happened. And WoW players are going to go, why did you run off the edge? Here it is. Okay, I want to be clear on something. WoW, guys, I didn't just run off the edge off this platform. That is not what happened. It looks like that, but if I slow it down, you'll see that's not what happened. I didn't just like go, oh, let's run off the edge. Not that I haven't done that.
Oh yeah, he just like, I guess he like clicked away from
movement. I know. This shouldn't be a problem. It is. It is a problem. Unless you are very confident in your style of doing it, which is where the FF14 players are going to be like, just do this, just do that.
Yeah.
And everybody has a solution to this. So what's happening? The gameplay is not as tight as it is in WoW. And in fact, that becomes an increased skill ceiling, is utilizing the fact that often you are telegraphed or positioned in a way that looks visually like you're safe on your screen, but you are not. You've been snapshotted earlier, and you need to know the snapshotting of various mechanics to understand how it works. This also works with your spell casting. So in Final Fantasy XIV, they have a mechanic called slide casting. Recently playing Midnight, I tried to slide cast some attacks, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm so ingrained on doing this from FF14 raiding, and it does not work in WoW. Not anymore. It used to in the Burning Crusade. It doesn't anymore now. But essentially, your cast has been registered by the server long before your spell bar completes, in which case you can move, technically, while your spell has stopped casting, but it will still go off, and you can utilize that to move very long distances without missing a single cast. So that is part of the gameplay that's happening here. In terms of the movement, my instinct is to go kind of WoW style, which is, because that's what I'm used to. Sure. I'm casting a spell. I'm playing a healer. I'm casting a spell, and I'm looking at the boss. It should hit the boss. That doesn't always happen, and it became very frustrating to me. Certainly after our first boss kill, I was like, I'm missing a lot of DPS time, even though I'm pressing the button, but my character is like probably slightly out of arc or something like that with my position and where the boss is, so it wasn't going off. There is a solution to this, in that you can have a movement style where your character will auto-face the target when you press the button to guarantee the spell goes off. So I was like, that's the solution. I'll go with that. FF14 players, hold onto your keyboards. I know you're typing either Legacy or something else. I know.
No. Well, the thing that's interesting to me, though, is that, so I have tried playing it that way out of, like, personal curiosity, because I didn't, one thing that you'll end up doing is going in, like, messing with the settings, because there is a point in time where, like, you play default for so long, and then you want to mess with the UI or, like, how the controls play itself out to figure things for your personal preference, right? So, when I learned that you can't attack because like there's certain mechanics in 14 where you have to like look away from the target, right, to like avoid getting hit with like a thing. So I remember, I forget which fight it was though, but I want to say it was like O2 in Stormblood, because I found out that I had to like turn away to not get hit with the gaze mechanic, and then it like froze me in time. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. So then I tried to see if there's a way to attack while still looking away, and turns out that there isn't technically a way to do it. I play on controller as well, by the way, just to kind of like further preface that. So, um, I remember changing that setting and then trying to like attack while looking away, and then got the error where it's like, oh, you're not like facing the target, and I'm like, wait, what do you mean? So I put the thing back on, and then I tested it, and then I realized that yeah, if you're facing away but you press the GCD, it'll auto face the target and do the attack. So you have to face the target. And it was mind blowing to me because I've seen other players play on like keyboard and mouse that they're able to basically like, I don't know exactly how you do it, but I feel like you hold like run animation, but you face your camera like away, and I guess you press like S to kind of run south. You kind of like stay in place, and when you swing, you like instantly turn back around. So like, on controller, I have to actually attack and then manually face away. I guess there's like a more automatic but also quicker way to do it on keyboard versus like controller. So I'm intrigued by the idea that he's talking about this because you kind of sort of can't play 14 well if you turn that feature off where you auto face the target on hit. But
oh,
you know,
well, that was my immediate solution. I was like, this is really frustrating, and there's some very severe DPS checks in this raid. So, and as a healer, most of your stuff is doing damage, right? That's the way it works in FF. Sorry, WoW guys who are like, I'm a healer, I don't do damage. That does not work in Final Fantasy raiding.
Wait, so did he turn off the function?
As much as humanly possible. And so I was like, I'll put that in. So what you're actually seeing, and this happened to me maybe, I don't know, 5 times over the course of all the wipes, is that I am moving away, but because I'm trying to DPS as I move, I'm trying to strafe it, it's actually spun my character so quickly, and it preserves momentum, that my character is going one way, immediately 180'd like a Resident Evil game, and just shot off the platform. And when this happened, yes, I felt the shame and embarrassment of all things, and it was something I still need to work on to this day.
That's interesting.
I just worked around it, and we'll work it out for next raid tier, whatever, and do something else. But that was a problem that I just didn't anticipate. It's never been a problem in extremes because the DPS checks don't really matter. Yeah.
I wonder how he'll feel about doing it also.
I really didn't enjoy that. So, needless to say, getting into this, I'm bad. Thankfully, though, the
I'd love for him to try and do like
you
cover T or something. And see how much more chaotic
I was getting better by the time we were doing the extremes. Number 3. What is the rating in Final Fantasy XIV Savage compared to WoW Mythic? Okay, I've never been more...
This is actually one of the most intriguing questions that I've always wanted to ask, and my problem with getting the answer for this question is that I've always gotten like such a varied opinion about how people feel about it. So I'm really curious to see what his answer is by comparison, because as somebody who doesn't raid in World of Warcraft like at all, I would love to understand, for somebody who's been playing the game for 10 years here, I wonder what it's like for somebody to be playing the game for the same duration over in WoW side, and see how that comes into play. I have heard like thoughts about what people have said about the raiding experience between the two games, but I'm really curious as to what he's going to say. So.
Convinced now I've done it, that the similarities are so far apart, it is almost impossible to compare.
Okay.
They're not alike in any way, shape, or form. Besides the fact that the Holy Trinity exists of DPS, healer, and tanks, that's about it. The rules of Final Fantasy XIV raiding are so massively different than World of Warcraft that the two are completely separate paths. The diversion is huge. So, let me explain. Okay. I already explained the arenas and stuff. If I was to describe it, in fact, it was actually Chris who described it as this. World of Warcraft is like a rugby game, right? It's chaotic. Things appear under you and you're not sure about it, so you move out of it as quickly as possible. A great player will have an instant cast spell, or maybe banked an instant cast spell, but it's somewhat unpredictable. Things might come your way, maybe not. When it comes to raid mechanics, typically speaking, even at the mythic level, even if you think about something like Mythic Dimensius, is maybe like 6 people at most will get chosen for a mechanic. So if you think about the Phase 1 Dimensius of getting teleported up in the air, that's 6 people out of the whole raid who will have to deal with that mechanic and be in the right place.
Right, because there's 20 players usually, right?
And just carries on damaging while walking forward a bit. That's it. In FF14, every single person, every single mechanic you are involved in, and you not only need to know what you need to do, you need to know what everybody else has to do, because on the next pull, you could be in their position. What I mean by that is, and I'll use an example here of the final bosses. I think it's called Grotesquerie Act 2. There are 8 possible outcomes that can happen during this mechanic, and you need to know all of them intimately. Because if one of you gets it wrong, it's a pass-fail mechanic. You all die. It's as simple as that. And each person has 2 things that can happen. Now, here's the tricky part. In WoW, generally speaking, a mechanic will repeat relatively often. So if you think about that Mythic Dimensius mechanic of lifting you up in the air and carrying you across, that's probably going to happen 3 or 4 times, that phase. And then there's probably only like 3 mechanics going on, right? You've got to stand in a thing and absorb the blast. You've got to soak some pools. You've got to get carried in the air. Those kind of things. And they'll repeat throughout that phase. Pretty simple. There's a good chance you'll get picked once, maybe, to get carried in the air. Unlucky twice, whatever. But usually it's only a few of you that are going to do that and move on. In Final Fantasy XIV, every single mechanic involves every single player. The relaxed part of FF14 is you might have to do 1 or 2 things based on what's happening to you rather than 3 or 4 if you get unlucky. But either or, all of you are going to get to do something every single time. And part of that difficulty comes into it's unlikely you're going to do the same thing the next pull. So like I was saying in World of Warcraft, you probably get to get carried in the air maybe once per pull. You know, once you start progging it, you're going to get to do it once per pull at least, right? And occasionally maybe not, but probably like once per pull, which means you get very regular experience on progression to get this mechanic right. That does not happen in FF14. In FF14, you're going to get something different, very likely, every single pull, which means you can't just learn how to do your thing simply, right? That will come into play a little bit, but it's more a case of like, let me explain this mechanic to you very quickly, is the worm wraps around you, traps you in the middle, and then you will get a debuff, right? You will either get a number from 1 to 4, and then a letter, alpha or beta. So you're either going to be alpha 1 through 4, or you're going to be beta 1 through 4. And depending on which one you get is going to massively change how you deal with what's coming up. You will see these tumors spawning on the floor. So if you get 1 alpha,
no, is that wrong?
What you're going to do is you're going to break a tether because you are tethered to 1 beta. You're going to snap that because of the timers, and then you're going to move around and deal with a tumor that is outside of the worm. However, 3 beta is then going to deal with this tumor here and then break their tether later on with 3 alpha because 3 alpha is doing it later, and 3 alpha is going to be doing something else and soaking this tumor, and then that's going to when the betas break their tether, a different beta has to then soak a tower that spawns after it. In other words, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Okay, wait. So I wanted to kind of chime in a little bit from what he said earlier. So what he was saying in World of Warcraft raiding is that there's a mechanic that occurs between 20 players and it picks 6 people instead of every single person. And it occurs multiple times, but there isn't like a guaranteed chance that you get it like often number of times. So if there are 3 people or 3 sets of people that can get targeted for like a pop-up mechanic, then there is a chance that you might actually average getting it once, which means you can also potentially get it twice, 3 times, and I'm guessing like also maybe even like 0 times. So what fascinates me is that he also describes it as well. He says that World of Warcraft mechanics are pretty unpredictable and pretty chaotic. So I'm very intrigued by that. And the reason why is because I've always felt like I've always loved that 14's rating has been a dance. Like the concept of the content being a dance, it just makes a lot of sense, right? Like the order and operations of when things happen is about like playing the memorization game. It's figure out how to apply it into the content as well. So I think that has always made sense to me, and I've always been a big fan of that. But I think also at the same time, what I've always desired, and this is a result of me not playing other MMOs that have the mechanics designed this way, is that there is like a chaotic battle that you can kind of sort of encounter, because every single content is essentially a dance. The only differentiation is that some of the mechanics or the dances are like just a little bit less complex, or they're like slower. So taking like a dungeon boss, the boss has like mechanics, and it kind of has like 2 or 3 things, maybe like 4 or 5, and it just kind of does them in a cycle, right? So the dance is just being able to have that cycle repeat over and over again. But there's not often moments where the boss is doing completely random chaotic things. But I feel like there are certain dungeons that we've encountered. I'm thinking the one from like Stone Vigil Hard, for example, or like there are certain monsters like small dragon mobs that you fight where they don't have a telegraph of or like a cast bar of anything that they're doing, but what they are doing feels pretty random just because you don't see a cast bar anticipating what's coming up next. So I think that as somebody who's been raiding for so many years, I've always wanted there to be a piece of content that actually adds like the, you know, this boss monster has like, a list of 10 different attacks. It'll do it randomly and at will, just, and just kind of follow like a, like the boss, like you queue into the instance, you do the pull, the 20 mechanics get jumbled up, and then it just does it in that order. And then if you die, then it'll reset the order basically, and then like send it again, right? So that way the chaos and unpredictability is there. So but I feel like from a 14 rating perspective and the way how the game is designed, it's not, I think that it's possible, but I think other people would say that it's not possible to design mechanics around that. So I think that personally, I would love to see them. I think you can call it like a difficulty type, basically. Like I wouldn't call it savage rating. I would call it like something entirely different, where like the difficulty inquires that like it's a raid, but it's not like a sequence dance, right? It is mechanically very random, and then when the boss reaches certain checkpoints of their HP threshold, then those abilities will just change. That way, mechanically, the boss has like a list of attacks that it chooses from between each phases, but which one it does is entirely random. I'd love to see if it's a possibility that this game could incorporate that type of content. Because I think that it could work really well in World of Warcraft, or from WoW to 14, basically. So, because one game that I was comparing it to as well that I've seen earlier, and I think that this game is also still like relatively structured, but it feels and it looks random because it's so fast paced, is Lost Ark. Lost Ark mechanics, just watching it, I feel like the boss is just gonna do, again, they have their own mechanics, and what they do is just like it feels so incredibly random, but because it's such a fast-paced like reactionary thing, I think realistically what I'm looking for in 14 is that the game is able to have reactionary type of content. I think that it's absolutely possible to incorporate, and I'd love to see them try to like design content around it. I don't think it has to be the centerpiece of content moving forward. Like I think that kind of similar to what we have with like the Criterion dungeons and like the Alliance raids and chaotic, like optional content that's not tied to like an ultimate per se, although that could be cool. That there is like some type of like reactive, chaotic, random content that offers like a challenge where, you have to actually be able to act in the moment, right? Like you don't really get that experience in 14 often, but I think that if they could incorporate that though, that'd be really cool. So
and it's a lock-in of memory. This is not a skill set you need in World of Warcraft, and this is where I really felt I should title this area "I Feel Like a Moron," because I did. I felt like an idiot. I am not great. I can remember what you're supposed to do with, again, we'll use Mythic Dimensius. Yeah, you need to make a Venn diagram. 3 of you need to make a Venn diagram, right? That's it. And pretty simple. And I could call that nice and early because I've got a nice boss timer that's saying it's coming in like 10 seconds. So guys, get ready. See if you get picked and go to your positions, right? And keep that area clear for dropping pools. Simple stuff. In FF, it's not going to work that way. Until you get assigned, you know it's coming because it's very scripted. But until you get assigned, what you do with that is changing every single pull. And it needs to be correct. You all need to pull it off. So as I said, WoW is more like a rugby game. A lot of hustle and tussle, a lot of chaos, a lot of fast movement, lots of that going on. FF is more like synchronized swimming. And that's where a lot of people get the joy out of it. Very much like synchronized swimming. So I really struggled with this. I would say everything else up until now, besides a little bit on the third boss, namely the platform area for the people who know it, I was okay with. I was getting it. It was in my head. It was fine. Everything was good. At this point, though, this final boss, this mechanic, I was like, I am getting stuck. There's 8 variants of what I'm supposed to do, and they work in a weird order. It's 3, 4, 1, 2. We know that now. But I was getting lost. I was like, okay, what do I do now? And like trying to remember it. And so I was like, how do I solve this? Because I do not want to be ever the dead leg in the raid. So how do I solve it?
True.
How did I solve it? I wrote it down.
Hey, listen, I mean,
and I got paper. Don't worry.
Realistically, this is something that I feel like people can actually take into concept when they do content. I mean, I don't think that you necessarily have to do this, but this is kind of the closest step to like, stepping into the concept of using like a raid plan or like, progging the fight for yourself. So having to actually write it down is interesting, because this is something that I would have done if raid plans or like the strategy board like wasn't available. but also a lot of the times we like watch Hector's video and then he kind of just explains it eventually, or like the raid plan will tell you exactly the same thing too and be like, oh my god, like it's like Looper from Top, except like it's like a whatever. So I think I'm really intrigued by the fact that he actually wrote this down and he was so puzzled by it. Don't get me wrong though, like Act 2 is a very confusing mechanic to deal with at first, especially if you didn't do Top, because people will compare it to Looper a lot, and so I mean I did the same thing too. So I feel like going through this mechanic for the first time for a lot of raiders is probably going to be very overwhelming. But I'm intrigued by the fact that this kind of mechanic doesn't exist in World of Warcraft. So I can understand that transitioning from WoW to this game and having to deal with a mechanic like this is like a lot, you know. Especially because he mentioned it too, right? Like I guess the cast bar is not always present in WoW, but like there is a way to make it present. That sounds like a plugin, but I'm not too sure. Where like you can see the thing coming in 10 seconds ahead of time. Like, see, we don't necessarily have that, but we also do because like the mechanic order is always the same, right? The only difference is like you have to fight the DPS check to kind of like get past that part. So, anyways, I mean I give him kudos for like actually writing the mechanic down.
That makes me feel
I
less
think
of a
that's really
moron.
cool.
And I will give you a justification for some of you hearing this going, why didn't you just do X? I'll come back to it. Don't worry. So I wrote it down. I got a pen and a piece of paper because my kids' homework and stuff was on the table. And I just went, okay, 1 alpha, do this. Break tether, soak this tower. 1 beta, do this. I just wrote it down. So when I got assigned my thing, I just went, okay, I know exactly what to do. Just look down at my paper. I'm like, I know exactly what to do. And then I was fine. After that, I was totally fine.
Okay.
I was like, I'm not telling anybody this because I feel slightly embarrassed that I've literally got pen and paper out and writing this down. But it works.
I give him more credibility for doing that.
It's working for me, so I'm not being the dead leg in the raid, and I'll get it right most of the time. And from then on, it was pretty chill.
I give him full credibility
so
for
we
doing
did
this.
progress
This
through
is
that.
awesome.
Then we get to phase 2, which
Idyllic
was
Dream.
much harder.
Idyllic Dream is probably
Finally,
like
the boss will start to cast Idyllic Dream.
yeah.
This hits for very heavy raid-wide damage. Transitions the stage, and we begin one of the most complicated mechanics in Final Fantasy XIV history.
Yeah.
Much harder. There is a 4-minute phase of this fight where you just have to do the biggest memory game ever. But I'd had a solution by this point, which was to write it down, and I did that again. I literally wrote it out so that when I had to do things with tethers, don't worry, it's very complicated, and I'm coming back to this. I do all this thing with tethers and things like that. I just wrote it down on a piece of paper so that I could just glance at it. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And then it just became a case of reps to get that right and get that rhythm going. Okay. So I got better. Great. Was I having fun? Yes. Now, let's get into the obvious. Why did I do this? And that's real. And some FF14 players are probably going, that's really lame. You're a liar. You're a liar.
No.
There is a lot I've discovered about FF14 raiding, which is an unearned smugness that also exists in games like Path of Exile. And I've brought this up a few times, and when I speak to the directors of those games, I bring it up there. It's like, I call it having your cake and eating it too. And thankfully, FF14 recently has sort of addressed this, rightfully so. FF14 doesn't have boss mods. I mean, it does, but like you don't use them, and I'm not using them. You can get things, let's put it that way, but
he's talking about okay, he is talking about the things that we technically can't use because of reasons said in whatever that it is. See, so this is one of those things that I never ever understood in my like tenure of playing 14, because I've always been okay, so like I play the game like just strictly like just super crazy vanilla. I'm much more aware of these things now, but this is part of the experience of an MMO that I just never understood, is that like there are like mods that you kind of use when you're in the process of raiding. So I didn't even know that this was like a thing at all. I understood it after a really long time. I think it wasn't until like mid Shadowbringers where people were like, "Oh yeah, like in WoW, there's like a thing that you can use that actually tells you when the timing of the mechanics is coming," and like they actually encourage you to download this stuff because like it makes the content like more not easier, but you kind of can have like a more mental prepared state of like mind when the mechanics are actually incoming. But like 14 already gives you that sort of by having the cast bar, right? So like I didn't realize that this stuff was like allowed in WoW, but and of course like it's not allowed in 14, but people still use it anyways. So like I think it's so fascinating like that because people played WoW and then transitioned over to 14, they kind of tried to find the same thing in terms of like all that stuff in 14 to like play the game. And like I just think it's like so fascinating that like that other games allow this and then like 14 strictly doesn't. I understand why though, because I feel like it kind of ruins the experience to some degree. They kind of want you to figure out like what you're supposed to do. And so for like a thing to kind of already tell you what to do like prior to like, but like the guide also does that as well, but the game, but doing it actively in game in real time is much different than doing it over like reading a guide or like watching a video on how to mechanically operate through the fight, right? So um wow, I think that's like so fascinating actually because not that I ever would want to understand what it feels like to use that stuff while doing content, but I'm actually just curious, how do raiders feel one going through that content with that stuff on in 14 versus like WoW, and also how do people feel about players who do use it versus players who don't? I guess in my opinion, like if I don't know that you have it, then I don't really care. But if I find out that you do have it, but you're not excelling in like the content because it kind of helps you tell you already what to do and like where to go, then I feel like it doesn't make sense to me why like you're making the mistake basically. You know what I mean? So um like I think that's just really intriguing.
Endorsed, and when people were using FF14 has a golden rule: if they don't want any plugins or anything like that that can affect the difficulty of raiding, because it means they can't balance it properly. I respect that, and I followed that to the letter. However, I do want supplemental information, because these are massive memory games. Huge, huge memory games. Let me give you an example. The mechanic I'm talking about in the final boss called Idyllic Dream. This is the raid plan for it. This was the one that came out first. It's 37 slides long.
Yeah.
I want to be clear, this isn't the whole fight. This is one of the mechanics in the fight. It's the hardest one, but it is one. There's more.
Yeah.
There's a lot more before this. The condensed version that I found is like 24. So it's still a lot. It's still a lot.
It's funny because like that's just what we do in 14. We just like straight up, whenever raid playing that gets, because everyone's always racing through the fights as quickly as possible to figure out like how to do the content, and like once the guide is released on how to do it, like the raid plan comes out and you kind of just like sort of do the raid plan. You know what I mean? So I mean, it just makes sense to me. Like, I wonder what World of Warcraft has in comparison. Because if WoW doesn't have like raid plans or like their own like Hector Lecterson videos, then like I wonder how they go through the content. Do you just brute force it, or do you just like use like I'm so curious actually. I hope
I
he
should
actually
reveal
explains that.
something to you, which makes the pen and paper more obvious. I was raiding at home because I wanted to have that comfort and be at home for nighttime. I have one monitor. That should make a lot more sense as to where we're going with this. I have one monitor at home. There isn't room for a second monitor. And as it turns out, you are all using notes. In fact, you're using notes more than I even thought was possible. And if I knew some of this was possible, I would have done it in-game. But you're all using notes. So many players simply have these raid plans and information just on the side of the screen.
Yep.
And they click through them as they're going through it. It's also done in-game via macros. People post this massive sort of like ASCII art of what's going to happen to let people know. People have macros made that literally type in the chat what is going to be happening later. People, including me now, because after I'd done the pen and paper system and it was working for me, more and more people started suggesting that we should utilize this, such as my little strategy board, which has all the way markers and has macros assigned to it. What do these macros do? These macros literally type out in a little box the order of events I'm going to be doing based on where I'm positioned. It's the same thing. And you know what it is, WoW players? It's private auras. It's just private auras. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, there's no boss mods. So instead I've made a macro that like I respond to and I press it and it gives me information. That's a private aura. It's exactly what it is. It might not come up with a visual in-game flash of what's going on, but I was like, it's just private auras. It's the same thing. I was like, that totally makes sense. Of course you're doing this. You're doing the same thing as me. It's just that I did it on pen and paper. And I know there was somebody out there going, well, I never do that. I was like, good for you. But a lot of players are doing this. They have the raid plan up. They open it up. They put it on the side of their screen for these very complex mechanics, and they can skip through it. And it has reminders, and they have macros, and all sorts of stuff to make their life easier. There's no shame in it. It's what we all do, especially when you're dealing with 4-minute-long memory games.
So this is where the little 14 brain on mine like turns on and is like, well, hold on now. So I have learned as I've been more exposed to the fact that people, well, I mean, not in terms of like the the shame of like using macros. I think that's like totally fine. I mean more so the shame of like people using plugins to make their experiences easier in terms of doing 14 content. Like, don't get me wrong. I I tried it. I played the game for like, I don't know, like 6 years, maybe at the minimum, 7 years, with like nothing, right? So I've always played the game in my mind like I own a console. Because the thing is that the console players don't have access to any of this stuff, which makes sense why they're trying to incorporate more options within the game, so that way you don't have to use like a third like tool to be able to like access it, you know? That's why the strategy board became a thing, because looking at a raid plan as a console player is technically impossible. So at least you can get the raid plan in game, but then nobody actively uses the raid plan for the idea in mind, or the strategy board. They use it for like for funny thingies, right? Which is like kind of okay, I guess. Anyways, so like, um, here's what I'll say. Because I'm so in the dark and in the unknown about the real like depth of plugins that you can use in this game, and how people can take it to advantages when it do fights, um I think that's really interesting. I'm not fully in agreement to it because I've never decided to do it myself, right? So like, to take ultimates into perspective, right? With Uwu, in Uwu, when you do Titan phase, you get the knockback, and then you get the 1 2 3 thing to figure out who steps in the jail, right? So like for me, like I tried to practice doing the mechanic without it on, because it's meant to be done that way without the number indicator to tell you what you are. It definitely facilitates the chaos of who gets what and reacts where to like do it correctly as easily as possible. And again, I completely understand that. But I am also like, man, it's like a little shameful that you needed to do it, right? Not everyone does, but it's the thought that it does do that, that it's kind of like, man, like I wish that that wasn't like a thing, right? A much more like extreme example is top, right? Omega Ultimate has it where, you know, um, like half of the fifth phase is literally requiring you to look at the indicator for that marker situation, so you can actively figure out where to go and what to do, because flexing in the moment is so difficult in like a short span of time. Now, again, I completely understand that. Did I clear top with the thing above my head? Yes. Did I have a choice? Unfortunately, no, because the timing of when the fights came out and then the markers were like a thing, people got really comfortable with it. I didn't have enough time or chances to actually like get to that part of the fight without using them, right? So like, but I did try to learn how to mechanically do it without the thing, and like I technically can do it. Um, but like you never really go into top without having somebody have it on, right? So, um, but again, people talk about how bad of an experience top is, and meanwhile, I'm a top enjoyer, and I would totally do top a lot more often. Like without the thing than I would do it with a thing, right? But I understand though that like some people like, the experience is so much more different when you have the thing that's like a quality of life, and then it like works, right? Anyways, so like, part of me is like, well, I think it's a shame that some people rely so heavily on certain like, you know, third party tools to just do content in 14, since you're not even supposed to technically use any of it in the first place. But I think that like the more that I've learned how much of it really exists, and the thought process too that all the players are using it, I've just kind of learned to just like not really care too much about it, since like it's not directly impacting my gaming experience. It is kind of like secondhand, kind of. But then the real problem kicks in when you find out that somebody is using a thing, but they're still not playing like up to par where they should be, because the thing kind of tells you exactly like what to do and where to go. Does that make sense? So I've just learned to accept it, because it's just part of the culture that 14 has as a game, and like I'm not going to necessarily knock it. But somebody did ask me like, hey, like if they got rid of every single plugin in the game in 14, would you be okay with this? And my answer was yes. So that's kind of like a thought process that I could share to like explain kind of my stance on that stuff in 14. But at the same time though, there are some pretty decent quality life stuff that I'm grateful for. So
that are changing on a pull by pull basis and require you to be in one group one time, swap to another, then swap back, and then remember that in the next pull you're not going to do that, and then you need to remember what these 4 meteors do that you always, because remember in WoW the same mechanic will repeat multiple times. If you see the same mechanic twice in Savage, it's usually like for a downtime period, because like you already solved this is just for a bit of DPS, and it will disappear just as quickly and then go into some horrendous nightmare immediately after. And so dealing with this, I didn't feel like as much of a moron. I was like, oh, you are making
good,
notes
though.
and stuff. You're just doing it in game. Like,
Yeah,
oh, you're
yeah.
doing it in game, or you're doing it on the side of a screen, whatever it might be, to make life easier. As a one monitor Andy, pen and paper made way more sense to me. I would have my sheet with all my breaks. Next boss, just put my other one in front of me, and it told me what to do. So I was happy about that, actually, at that point. I was like kind of relieved. It was like, yeah, it's a bit silly, but it actually makes sense for what I was doing, and I solved.
No, I think it's totally
In my
valid.
way, not
Honestly,
ego. It's
super
like
valid.
I did what other people are doing. I just did it in the way that I knew how to do. I didn't know you could make.
Well,
all this stuff in game.
everyone needs their own methodology to how they are able to do the thing, knowing that they're gonna like live up to the process and how the game is like meant to be played, right? So the fact that he's not using anything to like do the content, and he has his own method and approach to like trying to prog and figure out how the content works in his head, like a pen and paper is like such a valid way to do it personally. Like if you don't rely solely on the raid plan and you need your own form of processing through the content, like I think it's completely like logical and valid that he's using like pen and paper to do that. Right, because again, like some people just won't even bother with that. They'll just go get the plugin, and then they'll just let the thing kind of tell them right there in the moment, and then they don't got to think about it until it actually happens, right? So I think that's like the differentiation. So I gave him like massive respect for
You
that.
could make like a separate
super
chat
fire.
window that just tells you information, or that like you have the chat window really big because people are posting macros and stuff of what.
I never thought that about that
Now,
being like a thing, actually.
Overall thoughts.
Like using the macros.
As I said, they're not comparable. I think I've explained that. These are
Okay.
very intricate and much more difficult, to the point that my skill set from WoW did not translate into FF at all.
Just saying. Okay.
Very little. Other than always be casting, which I worked on from the start because I recognized that was being a problem based on my WoW. These huge memory puzzles, being extremely strict on positioning to every single mechanic. Like in WoW, sometimes that happens. You've got a stack on somebody and they're usually marked, something like that. That is a non-thing in FF14. It's like, you do that, but that's so basic compared to everything else you're doing. And learning that, like, watching the pattern of the floor to make sure the whole group has to rotate clockwise or use things called snake priority. I will say it's definitely made me better at both.
Snake prio.
Well worth doing if you're a WoW player, because you're going to, especially now we're moving into the add-onless world, so to speak, you will just be way better at positioning and stuff like that. I've always taught positioning in WoW. FF's made that even better, for sure.
Okay.
The beauty of it pulling off is very, very nice, for sure. When you have something extremely complex, be it Idyllic Dream, or the lead into that, and it works, and everybody gets it right. Such, you've got very complicated mechanics of positioning.
Oh my gosh, look at the
and
diagram.
Positions
Okay.
and things like that.
He's alive.
It's really pretty. Everybody's alive, and you make this massive leap forward. It's almost like breaking a Razageth shield or something. Is you just make this huge leap forward into the fight, and you're like, we're getting this. To the point where we one-shot the Lindworm Phase 1 on our Kill Night both times. Like, we had to reset the
Hey,
instance.
let's go.
We were so comfortable with a mechanic that was very problematic earlier on. So I'm certainly not indicating here I was the only one struggling with these mechanics. That's not true. That's beautiful. And you don't really get that in WoW. Very rarely do you get that in WoW. It's like, you got through this. When it happens, it's nice. In FF, it's all the time because you're constantly being bombarded by these things. And it requires everybody to move and rotate nicely and do all these things. And you see it all work in parallel and in a real synergistic way. It's gorgeous. The con to that is there's a lack of chaos and a lack of skill expression. I did feel that. It was... In World of Warcraft, one great player can do so many things that makes your life infinitely easier. And you can do a little bit of that in FF. Like, you can see that somebody's moved to the wrong spot. You also know where they should have gone, and you can adjust and make that go to their spot so it saves the pull, because usually it's pass-fail. And you can make these adjustments on the fly. That's great. In WoW, you can be really hard carried by like 4 or 5 people who are just utilizing their class to the max. And I always think about THD, Warlock for Team Liquid, during that Anseret kill, who recognized a massive problem that was about to wipe the group, and then utilized like his gateway. He was like, recognized it, and then used all these skill expression of his character in order to resolve that and remedy that situation, which nobody else could have done at the time. Figured it out.
Oh my gosh, they got like the whole like they got like all the I think those are all the red buttons are all the abilities that the boss is doing, right? And then they got the little parsing number thing in the bottom right corner, which is interesting. Okay, wait. I really want to talk about exactly what he's calling out here because I actually think that what he's saying just makes so much sense. And this is the problem that I think people are running into with playing 14 now is that the fights are so structured and organized that the chaos that I think people are looking for in 14 raids, they're not present. And I again, I understand that because 14 is such a structured game in terms of like doing the content, right? Whenever you raid in a savage fight, the order of mechanics is always the same. It never changes. The variants of what you can be doing in the mechanics do change, which makes sense. However, the fact that there's just no chaos in any content in 14 or like technicality, I think is something that leaves a lot of players yearning for that kind of concept to exist in 14 because it's so lackluster right now. So I think that's the thing that I'm learning personally that if I could like talk to Yoshi P at FanFest and be like, hey, I think that, 14 is incredible. I've been playing it for forever. And I think that you should like make content that does this and look into it because it's something that people would like to look into for the sake of the output of content. I think that that would be something that if we found out that that was content being created, I think people would be very excited because the chaos, the thing is like the chaos has been a strong translation to the concept of fun in 14. But like 14 developers have been focusing on making the content fun, right? Like the rating has been a lot of fun. Going through the content, figuring out mechanics, the execution of those mechanics has become more fun with time, but it still has that concept of, the order and sequence of all the events that like are occurring in 14 are static because, like Idyllic Dream is always at the end. You got to always fight Lindworm's acts 1 through 4, and then deal with like Curtain Call, and then splash it at the very end, right? So like, if there was a way to take any of the bosses we previously encountered and then just kind of give them like a mishmash of just random mechanics and then have it change every single time for the sake of the chaos, I think that would be something that would highly appeal to a lot of players. And I'm hoping that there's like an indicator of that potentially happening in the future with 14, just because I think that it's possible. Um, so I completely agree with him. Like knowing that World of Warcraft is a very like chaotic style type of rating, and then your skill expression is actually like present in the moment. It makes sense why a lot of players feel really good about playing World of Warcraft because you can actually express your level of skill and adapt to things based off of what's occurring because you have no idea what's coming up next. Even if you use these like um, you know, plugins to tell you the timing of when things are incoming. But like in 14, because you don't have access to any of this stuff technically, um, the skill expression can be there, but it's usually not because you're just kind of looking at what the cast bar is, and then it tells you like, okay, cool, like this mechanic is being casted. I know that it's a tank buster. I use mitigation, and I'm chilling, right? And also that's the thing too. For tank busters, like what mitigation you press is also usually the same every single time by theory. So what's fascinating is when 14 players like are seeing a tank buster that comes in, and people have been very like, they nerd out in terms of like mitigation sheets and plans to like doing content and like surviving attacks very easily. And the fact that people kind of like derail away from what that mid sheet is fascinating to me for 14 players, especially because like if you know that a certain tank buster is coming up and then in another like 30 seconds there's another tank buster, like some people will, use like their invuln for the first one and then their mitigation for the second one, when in reality you can just use certain mids for both of them and then keep your invuln for a thing that you can use it for like way later on, right? A lot of players don't actually do that. Unless it's very strict, like where it's like a requirement. But I think with Savage Raiding, that's usually more freeform, unless it's like very specifically designed, right? So like an M12, like prime example with Lindworm 2, where the busters, if you have a paladin as your main tank, then they have to like mit and share the hit with the off tank. But if you have any other tank that's main tanking, then they can just invuln their hit and then keep the tank alive, and then that tank can just like kitchen sink, and it's like pretty chill and cozy, right? So like sometimes that adaptation like comes into play, and like that's really cool. But I feel like in 14 that's like more of a pain than it is like a skill expression, because like if a main tank is a paladin for that mechanic, they have to do the mechanic that way because like they don't have the luxury of like doing it like with skill expression in mind. So that's another thing too. I know that right now as well though, like right now for Dawn Trail's sake, like they're focusing on designing content to be fun without massive appeal to the difficulty, which makes total sense. And so for 8.0, like they're going to be doing potentially like a whole like job rework system, and hopefully that'll allow the skill expression to return for a job application. Because like right now there's a whole mentality of like if you play a certain melee or like a certain tank, you pretty much can play all of the tanks and all of the melees. So I'm hoping that that changes going into 8.0, because it was explained that they're actually trying to work on that. But I think that what he's saying though makes
all
so
out.
much
They
sense.
use his teleport, all these skill things, and not just mentioning DPS. A great player in WoW will always just be ahead, just maximizing so many little intricacies. And in FF, that's considered as standard, is to do that
Yeah,
kind
you
of
see.
stuff. And what you end up with is just a little bit of a inability to really express yourself as a player. I'm not there yet, but like I know that I can't do that in a massive way.
I say that all the time. Like what you press, when you press it, where you go, what you do, always is the same. It never changes in 14. And I think that that's like that could be like a decent thing when you can become consistent with it. But what's problematic is that in 14, shocking to popular situations, um, that whole idea of what you press, when you press it, never changes is still not being maintained by the player base, even though like it's just a matter of memorization. So I find it very fascinating that 14 players are still unable to respectfully memorize when to press what, because like most of the time when you figure out the memory game and how to apply yourself in the fight, like it is just a matter of figuring out how to press it sooner or faster or better. You don't have to really change things around that often. That not I mean, mitigation's like a different thing, but I mean like more like your DPS rotation, right? So um yeah, I mean I think that's very interesting.
Like you can in World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, the rooms are so chaotic and random. And you think about a Mythic Plus dungeon, things are going wrong, but I can stun that guy, I can interrupt this guy, I could grip this guy, I can help with this guy, I can bring this player in, I could do all this sort of stuff to remedy and make
Yeah, this is what I want.
In fact, it's how I started my channel. If you go back to all my early stuff in Cataclysm, we talked about being a baller. What did that mean? The baller was the guy who was just doing all these extra things that was making everybody's life so much easier, even if they weren't aware of it in any way. There's just a lot less of that in FF. In fact, as if you're using the same strat, because there are different strategies for these bosses, there's some variance in various areas. Most kills look identical because that's how it was designed to be solved. That's how it works. Like, everybody's learning this dance. Another pro to that system, though, it does make their content way more puggable. I was really surprised to learn that people, you don't really pug Mythic. There are pugs, which are like sometimes half guildies or later in the tier or whatever. But I'm talking early in progression of a new raid tier coming out. People are pugging all the way through the Savage Raids. And the reason they're doing that is because if you learn your dance, you're part of the routine, think of it like synchronized swimming. If you learn that and other people are learning that, then it comes together and it works in a really nice way.
That's one of the pros that I've always loved about 14 rating. So I think that's why, like, I'm not asking for them to get rid of the synchronized dance. I think that's like the core functionality of how 14 rating should be designed. I think I would just love to have it added on top as separate content where you can have the chaos, right? Because even chaotic, the Alliance raid versus Cloud of Darkness it's not chaotic because it's chaos and it's random. It's chaotic because there's 24 people dealing with mechanics in a way that just doesn't really offer you like a lot of space, right? So that's kind of what that is. But even chaotic Alliance raid is synchronized as a synchronized dance. So that's why I would love for them to add like a chaos thing where it's complete, or it feels completely random.
And that's something that does happen. Obviously, it takes weeks sometimes, but great players who are so good at memory games and have been watching the streams and know the strats. Because one thing we noticed when we did the Race to World First Final Fantasy XIV is once the puzzle is solved, because it's very much a puzzle encounter, that's what you're dealing with, a very complicated puzzle. Once it's solved, the floodgates kind of open on everybody else, killing it very quickly because it comes down to, can you execute that puzzle? That doesn't really happen in World of Warcraft, right? As a great counter to both of them is you can watch Liquid, Echo, Method, or whatever defeat these bosses, and they'll release a guide on how you do it. It can still take you weeks to enact that because there's so much output required, so much skill required from the players that varies, and some very tricky things that need to be pulled off by individuals. And I do miss that in FF, is the individual, be the volunteer. Big video I made in WoD, which a lot of you still follow.
Oh
Was
yeah.
be the volunteer. Can't really do that in FF. Right?
Yeah.
Can't really
That's
put
exactly
a lot
what
of
I
extra
want.
burden on your better
Personally.
players, and they embrace it in some way. You think about a Roger Brown in Echo, who was notorious for doing these very, very complicated, burdensome challenges because you could trust him to utilize his class and his ability as a player to do that, while everybody else can sort of like attack a training dummy as much as possible. Yeah, I miss that. But on the other side of it, it makes that content much more accessible to people, because
I think the accessibility thing is great, though. I also think that it's possible to design chaotic content that has that random variance and also still keep it accessible to players as well. I think that's totally possible. I just think that again, I don't want to make it sound like we're trying to deliberately gatekeep people, because that's not what we want. I think that what raiders are looking for, and I think I feel this way because I'm also looking for it, and not that I don't find it, but I can differentiate like how well I can memorize the dance compared to other people, but I can't necessarily like showcase like how much more knowledge do I have in the raid content versus other players, when like what we do and where we go and what we press is the same every single time. Some of it you kind of can, but it doesn't really offer like a major advantage, I feel. So, and I think again, I think it also completely depends on the fight. The only role that I think that you can actually showcase that like awareness in the moment of certain things that's occurring is the supportive role. So I think like primarily healers, right? So if like a person's HP is low and you can like spare an OGCT heal on a target before an AoE comes out because like they're just far away, being able to adapt to that moment is great, but you're doing it at like the detriment of their placement, not like your skill expression. So if you use an AoE heal and the black mage is still in the corner doing their casting and the AoE's coming up and they didn't get the mitigation or the healing, then healers are able to adapt to that and actually give them resources to help them survive the attack, even though they weren't there for the initial preparation for the mitigation, right? So that expression is really, really cool. Tanks can kind of sort of do it, but it's kind of few and far between. Like similar idea, right? Like if I'm playing Dark Knight, I can put TBN on the black mage who's still across the way because they didn't pick up the heal, and they'll live the mechanic, which is cool, but it's because of their error, not because of our benefit. It could be beneficial, but the real problem lies in like their like their placement being erroneous. So yeah,
if you know your part, you can go ahead and do it, and that is a big plus to the community.
I think the
There's
plugging
a
thing
lot
is
of them
great.
aren't in an organized guild.
Oh, sorry, I didn't put my point. Sorry. I think the plugging thing is great for 14, and I really like that there is a lot of accessibility. Um, but there is still a small part of me though where the puggability of the content I think is very valuable in 14. But I think what I also want though is like like if you're ready to, I think that like the problem really lies more in the content itself, not more so in the player base. Because I don't think that gatekeeping is like a word that I want to say and have it mean like I want this. But I think what I want is that like if a certain raid is designed to be very difficult and have like a constant sense of that difficulty to play itself out, then I think I want that to retain its value. So like easiest example for me personally, because I'm now raiding in ultimates, is ultimates, right? So like as ultimates get older, they actually get like easier, right? Not in terms of like how do you press buttons and what you do, but because like, for fights like Uwu and Yukab, you don't have to bring gear from those initial raids to actually clear the content, right? The DPS check becomes completely invisible basically for all that content because the power creep is so strong. What I would like is that the power creep for that content to actually just not ever occur. That way, like if you're a player who's going to try and get into an ultimate, like you have to be ready to bring the best possible gear that you can acquire to do that content, which I think would have the most value. Now, maintaining all the gear for that is obviously hectic and it's a lot. But I think that's what I'm looking for when it comes to ultimate content, where like if you don't bring the proper things to do the content, like you're just not ready for it, right? Progging the fight is like totally fine. Anybody can prog a fight. But people put in time and effort like years and years ago to actually prog and do that content. So I'm hoping that there's a way that 14 can like figure out a way to bring the value of ultimate as like a concept back into the game where the challenge is always present. Now, again, I'm not saying that the challenge is accessible to anybody, because obviously there's players who don't do raiding at all. But I think that if you ever had a desire to try and do the raid, then you're going to get the intentional difficulty put in place for the fight as it was intended to be designed. But that also goes for Savage Raiding and Criterion and like for Trials, like all the content that has like the enrage and like the idea of being like a challenge should always enforce that to and like keep it as strictly there as possible. But it does lose its luster over time
because it's called there, and just going into the pug world of Player Finder. It's going to take them a lot longer, maybe, dozens of hours, maybe. But it's possible because you know your piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with FF14 raid sizes being somewhat similar. So they're not the same thing. It's a totally different environment. When it comes down to the question, what's better, what's harder, WoW or FF? This is what I could say. Ultimately, the big thing that I took away from this is that I missed just raiding with the guys and doing progress. That is the main core attraction to me of raiding, is getting together with a bunch of people that make you laugh, you can have fun with, and you kill bosses and play a game you enjoy together. That is always going to be the main crux of raiding regarding the
Of course,
game.
yeah.
But more specifically, they're so different. In WoW, let's put it this way, which one do you prefer? If you prefer fast-paced combat, really like channeling into a boss and pulling off some really cool stuff with tighter combat, it can't be denied, when it comes to the netcode and responsiveness, WoW is the king. It has been the king forever. No game that's come out in the last 20 years has been able to compete with World of Warcraft on that level. Their netcode is extraordinary. Obviously, it leads to problems in massive groups, but when it comes to raids, and when it comes to like being able to just interrupt on a dime, there's nobody who does it better. It almost plays like a single-player game, and it will be better for that. If you prefer the chaos, if you prefer that style of stuff, World of Warcraft will always be for you. However, if you prefer problem-solving, if you prefer the absolute beauty of being able to pull off these very intricate designs and having it all work out and everybody solve it, and even seeing people who are struggling get over that hump, FF is superior in that regard. It's so much better.
Interesting.
Both games have found what they're good at and have worked on that, and they're now totally so far apart from each other that it works really well. Playing both will make you better at both. That is unquestionably true, and denying yourself that sort of experiment, that content, I think is a bad idea. Well worth it. If you want to get better at WoW and you're on farm, for example, doing some stuff in FF with some friends, especially because you have way smaller raid sizes, which causes tons of problems, then you're going to get a much better experience, a much more all-round experience. You're going to recognize patterns, you're going to recognize things that you've seen in other games, especially in this new add-on-less logic era in WoW that's going to make you better. And if you want to get better at FF combat, WoW is going to be so much different that it's going to improve you there as well. Which is harder.
Okay.
Depends on who you are. All my WoW knowledge kind of fell apart, and I got frustrated at myself midway through this because it was like, oh, I now have to remember these extremely long patterns and intricate things, and I don't get to practice them like every single pull. Yeah, I can't lean on that. I have to learn a whole new skill set. That was rough for me, but ultimately, like I said, made you better. I really enjoyed this. It's really fun, and my final thoughts are: try both, man. Like, certainly
True,
if you're
honestly.
a WoW player, jumping into FF is very easy to do, and also just will be a fun experience. You only need to part your raid team as well. Thank you for listening. Bye, guys.
I like that. Yeah, that was awesome. So, I mean, I think I actually have to agree with him as well on that too. Like, which game is harder? I think so. I've heard a mixed bag, right? Similarly too. I've heard a lot of WoW players say that 14 is way harder. I've heard 14 players go play WoW and they're just like, well, it's easier to sit there and like press buttons and do DPS and mechanics or whatever, but like there is so much more chaos, and so sometimes having the rigidity in 14 translate into the chaos in WoW makes WoW harder because like you're not ready for like the randomization of and like the variance of what comes into play. So I can respect and appreciate that there is such a like differentiation between both games, because people compare these two games all the time, and I've also played both and had my own sense of comparison, but I really can't give it any like immediate relation because I haven't done the WoW rating at all. So what I really should do is go play WoW enough to the point that I can do raids and actually figure out like how it translates, because for my brain to play WoW after playing 14 for so long. Like, I'm really curious how it'll like kind of like transition, you know. And also that's like other MMOs as well. So, but we'll see. But oh no, honestly, Preach did a fantastic job with this. His video will be in the description in case you want to try and watch it for yourself as well. But I really enjoyed hearing his thoughts about WoW. It actually makes me want to try it out. I'll try and see if I can get into it, but I think that I'm so glued to 14, like it's just not going to be the easiest transition into it, but I'll definitely try and give it a shot. But hey, hopefully if you are a 14 player or a WoW player, you enjoyed this and get like an idea of it too. And let me know what you think in the comments. So thank you for watching and tuning in. I appreciate it. And of course, as always, I will see you in the next one. Take care.